Welcome to this 14th video in English 100, which is where we enter the third and final part of this course and our study of the book Cambodia. There are actually two things that I want to do today. The first is to give you a general introduction to the book and suggest how we might approach critiquing it. And the second is actually something completely different, and it's to do with your writing of essays. Having worked through your first assignments, which of course I've now handed back, it's evident that many of you are having problems with writing essays in English. These are basic grammatical problems or coherence problems, even thesis development problems. You know that now because I've handed back the assignments to you. So what I thought I would do to try and help you is show you an essay written by a student many years ago, actually in, I think it was English 104, and she wrote an essay, a research essay on the Bloody Chamber, and I've deliberately chosen that essay because of course you've now read that story and you're familiar with it. So I thought that I would show that to you and then take you through my own comments. In other words, my thought process as I was marking her paper. And hopefully, that's part of the process and it will help you to perhaps identify some of the things that you've been doing wrong too. All right, so I don't know, maybe we'll get there in 20, 30 minutes time. We'll see how things go, all right? Let's begin at least with Cambodia. And I want to take you back to something I remember from, I think it was around 2009, 2010. It was when the film Avatar came out. Do you remember it? It's the kind of amazing 3D film with the environmentalist message, and it was the James Cameron film. So I was in the UK back then, and I remember I was watching late night news, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, probably semi-drunk, whatever. And the first item of news was, I don't know, whatever, something the Prime Minister said, doesn't matter. But the second item of news was the film premiere of Avatar. And so, we're taken to the Leicester Square Odeon Theatre, and the flashing cameras, the red carpet, the stars being interviewed, there's James Cameron being interviewed, sort of thing. Then we go back to the television studio, and the news presenter then held up to the camera the front page of the Times newspaper, as if to say, this is what's going to be in your newspaper, hot off the press, first thing in the morning when you wake up. And on that first page was a huge colour photograph of this movie premiere, so the flashing cameras, the red carpet and everything else. And I'm sitting there thinking, this sucks. And there's something totally fishy going on here. So let's just put together my inebriated thoughts of that night. Thought number one, who is the distributor, company, owner of the film? Answer, 20th Century Fox. Major shareholder, Rupert Murdoch. Okay. Second inebriated thought. Who is the major owner of British Sky News broadcast network? Answer, Rupert Murdoch. Third inebriated thought. Who owns the Times newspaper? Well, you tell me, Mr. Murdoch himself. So I hope you see the point. We have a message. I guess the message is, come and see this wonderful film and have a great time. Now, the message is created by the people who are going to benefit from that message, right? So it's going to be the owners and beneficiaries of the film itself. The message is then disseminated. It's a good word. It means spread around. It's disseminated by media networks, which are in turn owned by the very beneficiaries of the film, of the message itself. So hopefully you can see it's like a sort of internal sort of engine that's operating here. And if we start to think about power in terms of message, of information, of ownership of the message and of its dissemination, then we start to encounter what we might call a network or a nexus of power. Maybe no big deal if we're talking about a movie, but let's imagine another message. What about this? Let's imagine that the message is, we are at war with fundamentalist Islam. And let's say that the message is created in this instance by the George Bush White House and military-industrial complex. And let's then say that the message is disseminated by media networks, which are owned by supporters of the Bush White House. And you've got the same thing, right? The same kind of nexus of power. Now, please understand, I am not telling you that that is what happened. What I'm telling you is I think that is what Brian Fawcett thinks happened. I think this is what Brian Fawcett thinks is happening all the time and has happened throughout history. So really, all you have to do then is mess around with the message. Why don't we do that? Why don't we just flip it around and say that the message is, we are at war with the Western infidel, and say that the message is created by Islamic clerics, the message is disseminated by media networks like Al Jazeera, which are funded by supporters of Islamic clerics, and so you have the same thing. One more message. Go to church, pay your dues, or you will burn in hell for eternity. A message created by the Roman Church. A message disseminated by its bishops and priests, who are, shall we say, employed by the church. And that is story number 3 in the book, The Entrepreneur and God. That's all Fawcett is really suggesting, is you have this network, this nexus of power, and he imagines this almost as a bureaucratic system, a corporation, really, with its own brand image and its own franchise networks. I'll talk to you more about that when we get to story number 3, I think in the next video. But hopefully you get it, right? I mean, that's how he sees history. I'm not saying you have to see history that way, because it's kind of cynical, isn't it? But that's how he sees it. And I guess my point here is, before we can start critiquing a text, we need to try and understand what it's saying first, right? So that's what we're doing now. Okay, I think the next step in understanding what Fawcett is saying is understanding that he's saying 2 things. He's saying that elite groups have, throughout history, gained and maintained power by, firstly, extinguishing individuality and creativity and particularity, and secondly, by extinguishing memory, or, if not extinguishing it, then creating or fashioning a single type of memory, if you like, that everyone will share. This is what Fawcett is arguing throughout this book. If we look at that first element, I think his idea is that if you extinguish individuality and particularity, then you will be limiting, drastically limiting, the possibility of revolution, of reaction, because that requires creative thinking. And secondly, if you extinguish memory, or fashion memory in the way that I've just mentioned, then everybody is going to be remembering in the same way. They're going to be remembering the same things in the same way, And that means they will be much more likely to go along with the status quo because they can't imagine anything different. This book is an exploration of those two things. In the socio-historical essays running beneath the line on each page, Fawcett is exploring how this actually happened in history. So that's why he takes us to the Belgian colonization of the Congo. And of course, most specifically, that's why he takes us to the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 1970s, because they did exactly this. Let me just take you to that. This is page 5 of the book. Down here in the subtext, he says, most of the victims of the Khmer Rouge were this Marxist revolutionary group that took over Cambodia. Why and how they did is for reasons we'll explore later. But this is what happened. Most of the victims of the Khmer Rouge were killed merely because they could remember a different kind of world than the one the Khmer Rouge were attempting to recreate out of the rubble of the Vietnam War. And now I'm on page 6. Others were killed because they imagined a different kind of world. Memory and imagination were both capital offenses in Khmer Rouge, Cambodia. So, if we ask ourselves, what's happening in this strange book? It's this analogy that Fawcett is making. He's saying that elite groups have extinguished individuality and memory throughout time. He takes us to specific historical examples of that in the essays, and then he says that that is analogous to what's happening to you today in North America, in Canada. That's the analogy, because every story above the line is a different metaphoric exploration of how we are similarly victimized. Now, some of you will be aghast by that. You may well be sitting there thinking, how the hell can he possibly say that we are also victims in the same way? And if that's how you feel, and if that's how you feel in 3 weeks' time, great. You will write that in an essay. I'll tell you more about the essay later. On the other hand, what we might have here is an analogy which is deliberately false. Deliberately, it's that intentional fallacy. Remember, we talked about it previously. It may be that Fawcett is being deliberately provocative, putting these two things alongside each other in such a shocking way as to get us to rethink what's happening to us today in North America. Again, I mean, that's going to be for you to think about and decide upon when you get to your essay. I suppose it is a sort of segue into me explaining why I'm teaching this book. I imagine some of you, if not many of you, are quite distraught, are just so fed up with this horrible book and hate me for getting you to read it. Well, my apologies, kind of. But, you know, I think it's a very provocative book, and it's great to teach for that reason, because it elicits really strong opinions from students, either for or against. Of course, some students are on the fence, and that's a very academic place to be. But I find that it helps to teach provocative texts like this. And secondly, I think that what he has to say, particularly about the effect of media and modern communications technology on cognitive organization and behavior, is arguably more relevant to us today than when this book was written. I wrote to Fawcett a while ago, and I said, look, you know, this book is over 25 years old. Why should I carry on teaching it? I was being a bit mischievous. And he wrote back, and among other things, he said, everything I wrote in Cambodia is still true, period. mean, that's typical Fawcett, right? And he said, but the jury's still out on, you know, the tribalizing effect of the internet. So I think he was still at that time, and is still thinking about it, as indeed we all should be. So there's, if you like, the second reason why I'm teaching this book. It's to do with this idea about media and its effect on us, which takes us today to social media. And it's something that we need to be thinking about. You may well be sick of the topic, you know, tough shit. We're going to think about it. We're going to talk about it. And you're going to write about that in your essay towards the end. Okay, third reason I'm teaching this book is because no matter whether you agree with it or not, whether you like what he has to say or not, I think it's clear that he's a really good writer. At least it seems to me that he's a really good writer. He's very clever in the way that he uses language, and in particular at the way he uses metaphor. And you know now how important metaphor is in this course. And as I mentioned, almost every story, fiction, the fiction in this book is almost a different metaphoric treatment of the basic ideas I've just been explaining to you. And so what I'm going to be doing down the track in the next 3 videos is taking you through each story, explaining how the metaphors are working, explaining what the story is about, if you like, connecting that story to the subtext where relevant, so that at the end of these videos you will have, hopefully, a very good understanding of what's being said in this book, and the facility to write about it, to write about your feelings and your opinions. Okay, but again, I will help you and prepare you for that essay in a much clearer way in the next video or 2. Right? I mentioned metaphor, so why don't I give you one? Yeah. So I'm just going to be hopping, skipping, jumping around this book. So if I were you, unless you're going to have these videos very close around you, I would be sort of making notes, maybe have the book in front of you and follow me with the arrows, you know, making arrows in the book so you're following where I'm going, okay? So I'm actually in the preface here, opposite page 5. And he says, you know, this book argues that to create art based on individual but comprehended subtext is dangerously anti-democratic. There's no evidence, he says, that anyone in this atomized culture understands its subtexts. And there's a great deal of evidence to suggest the opposite, in fact, that we've lost the ability to understand critically, to pick up subtext. And so he gets to the end here and he says, as a result, or in response to that conviction, I've made the subtext of this book visible and literal to the best of my ability, which is that bit below the line. Okay, it's the subtext. The white noise and light and the abused other continue to grow. There's the metaphor. It's a metaphor of white noise, sort of obliterating white light, obliterating color and particularity and differentiation and diversity. So what I've done is I've done a little arrow from there to page 14. So if you follow me, please. And I'm now in the subtext on page 14. The ugly truths of our time are neither dark nor silent. They have been rendered opaque by full frequency light that admits neither definition nor shadows, and they're protected from the voices of the suffering and the disaffected by an accompanying wall of white noise. So you can see how this metaphor is threading back into the text. And then a little arrow from there, please, to page 43. Careful, because my book is falling apart here. 43, subtext. And he's talking about the 17th century, and he's talking about this group of religious zealots called the Calvinists. So I'll talk to you more about them when we get to story number 3. But he says, the disciples of John Calvin have been in your village. So what do? They go into your church, and at the bottom of 43, to reinforce their message, they will go into your church and alter it. They will break up or burn the icons and whitewash the frescoes. And so we have this metaphor of whitewashing here. And then an arrow to page 62. And this is where he's talking to us about the Khmer Rouge. When they entered Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia, look what they did, bottom of 62. They painted over with white paint every single sign in the city. And there's never been an adequate explanation for why they did that. And then on the next page he says, well, perhaps like the Calvinist zealots of the 16th and 17th century who painted over the muraled churches, the Khmer Rouge wanted to obliterate particularity, direction, and local memory, creating in its place, in its stead, a focus on the single truth, the city of God. And I'll talk more about that another time. So, I mean, I could go on, right? So this metaphor of white noise, white light just repeats itself. It threads. It's an extended metaphor. It threads throughout the text and in the stories too. This is how he's writing and using metaphor in the construction of this book. Okay, now, why don't we imagine that we are dictators, however uncomfortable that may feel? So this is like Dictatorship 101 now for a couple of minutes. So there we are. We've taken control of our country with the guns and the tanks and everything. And we had a great party last night and awarded ourselves lots of shiny, lovely new medals. And yeah, now it's a cabinet meeting. So now what we've got to come up with is policy that will help us to maintain our power, right? So we've gained it. How do we maintain it? Or in other words, how do we do 1 and 2 that I told you about? How do we extinguish individuality and particularity? And how do we extinguish memory or create our own type of memory? So have a think about it. What would we do, right? Think about Hitler, Franco in Spain, Mussolini in Italy, Pinochet, Videla in Argentina, today, right? Dare I mention Russia? Dare I mention China? North Korea? All right, go back further in history, whatever, you got it. Now, what do you do? What do you do to turn our new dictatorship into a long-lasting, why didn't we say 1,000-year Reich? Well, lots of things you can do. One is to create a kind of personality cult around the leader. Statues, images, you know, all that sort of bullshit. You can have, you know, lots of policemen on the streets and stuff like that. You can have curfews. I guess very often it's going to help to create an external aggressor, a threat out there, some evil foreign power that's, you know, out to get us. And that will help to whip up patriotism and xenophobia inside and galvanize everybody. Okay, so that's a good idea. I guess we could have laws which reward and benefit those who support us. But we need to be careful about people who are going to oppose us. Who are they likely to be? What sector of the population should be most concerned about? And the answer is you, right? Young professionals, students. Think about Hong Kong, right? So maybe what we should do is round some of them up and maybe have some gruesome public executions. Or maybe we could just round up some of them in the middle of the night so they just disappear. I mean, this is the Argentinian playbook from the 1970s. They just disappeared. Chile too, and other places, of course, many other places. Okay, so we can do that. And there will come a point at which we don't even need to do much of that, because we can just rely on people giving each other up. This is the rather horrible realization, if you do any research on this, that, for example, Hitler's Gestapo, his kind of secret police service, didn't require many employees. There might be one or two Gestapo officers in a sort of medium-sized German town, because they just relied upon people coming in off the street. And so, I don't know, Eric would come in and say, I just want to have a word about Fritz, my neighbour. He's a farmer next to me. He's a lovely guy, Fritz. Known him for ages. Lovely kids, lovely family. Regular. But you know what he said about Hitler the other day? Just thought you should know. Yeah? So you can rely on people doing that to each other, which is pretty scary. Okay, now what else? If we want this to last, we need to rewrite history, don't we? We need to rewrite the textbooks, and we need to get into the schools. And really young, infant school, elementary school. Anybody above the age 15, 16, probably too late. This is the Khmer Rouge, right? They had squads just running around, 14-year-old kids with automatic rifles. Okay, so we're rewriting history, changing what people are learning, changing their memories. I mean, if we really want to be drastic, we can just say this is year zero. That's what the Khmer Rouge did, right? Okay. And then we need to control the media. I mean, in the case of the Khmer Rouge, they pretty much obliterated it. There almost wasn't any media except that public announcement through the tannoy megaphone. Okay, so, well, you get the picture, right? These are all the sort of things that can be done to make the dictatorship endure throughout time. And in these stories running below the line on each page, this is what Fawcett takes us to, how this has actually happened in history. But if we look at ourselves today, modern North America, I think what Fawcett is focusing on is the media, because he's saying you don't need the rest of this paraphernalia. You really don't. All you need is to control the message. That's why he is concerned about not just who owns the message today in North America, but how the message is disseminated. And I think what Fawcett is saying is that the mode of dissemination is primarily in the form of entertainment. So that even our news is basically in entertainment. It's designed to titillate us rather than tell us fact, make us informed. So he's kind of hostile about the whole entertainment thing, which is why you don't like this book. I guess some of you are going to like it, but a lot of you are not liking this, I understand. It's because he's not playing the game. He's not playing the game like Edgar Allan Poe or like Angela Carter and the rest of the people, who are telling you a story, and you kind of, once you start reading it, you kind of get involved and even, well, hopefully enjoy it. It's not Harry Potter, right? Of course it's not. He's not going to play the game because he thinks that entertainment culture is dumbing us down. And when you look at media today, when you think about primetime television and reality shows, and the bullshit that we watch, and I'm on no pedestal here, maybe he's got a point. That's why he breaks up the book the way he does. That's why this is not a novel. So let me repeat that. This is not a novel. If you say to me in your essay that this is a novel, it's telling me probably that you haven't watched this video. And if you did, that you didn't understand what I just said. This cannot be a novel because he's not playing that generic game. This is a blur of genres. It's actually really difficult to categorize this generically. It seems to me to be part fiction, part socio-historical essay, part, I don't know, journalistic rant, part cartoon with these pictures. It's a blur, right? Deliberately so. Let's give you an example. Why don't we go to page 17? So now I'm in the second story called A Small Committee. And now I'm in the text, by which I mean the story. So here we are, the final paragraph of page 17 in the text. A female committee member stands up to address the committee. And we have a bit of description about it, the way she looks and holds herself. She's a lawyer. And as we read this, as a reader, we imagine a woman now. It could be someone you know, an actress or whatever, but you have an image. Okay. And then she says that she's the committee's biggest success, and today she's going to speak on the question of natural rights, which to her are the same as property rights. That's a kind of interesting thing for her to say. What's she going to say next? Well, before she speaks, here's Fawcett. Let me outline the ostensible matter. And so he's kind of intervening in the story. Anyway, she's back. Next page, page 19, and we have a bit of dialogue, thank God. And it kind of builds into a confrontation because of the things that she's talking about here. And so we have a confrontation with a senior official who turns on her and challenges her about the fact that she never uses public transport. And so we have this kind of frisson, this kind of moment of interchange and a sort of dramatic encounter. And look what happens. Page 21. Bullet point, space, and now here's Fawcett again, with his finger in our face, interfering and intervening in the text. And we have a number of pressing items on our agenda, you and I, reader. So he's not going to let you just sit back and relax and enjoy a story, as you well know. All right, that's why this is so frustrating and annoying at times. Next 2 pages, there's a bit of information about what he means by the elect. Page 23, to be a member of the elect, or this elite power group, is to be among the chosen. Throughout time, Fawcett understands that there have been elites and elects. Okay. And then we get to, sort of in a meta-narrative sense, he's drawing attention to the process of writing this book and writing this story. On page 27, he says halfway down, as the writer of this tale, I have a problem. And here it is. If I stick to the story on the terms by which the committee approaches both itself and the world outside the committee room, I don't have much of a story. It lacks excitement. There's no plot. It's boring, which is why you're bored. So what do I do? What do I do, he says. And at least he's being upfront and honest about it. So he says, well, you know, what I could do is jazz it up. I could Disneyfy it. And I've now gone to page 30 in the text. You know, I could have exploding 747s. I could have this as Die Hard. I could have sex scenes, people with guns. I could give you what you want. Turn it into Narco, right? Yeah, I can do that. Or do something actually different. Even perhaps more dramatic, which is just tell things as they are. Open our eyes to the world as it is. And no matter what you do from here, that's the story we're all in. And I suppose that's the point at which you either read on or throw the book away. Except in your case, you have to read on because I've made you do it. Subtext 45, he says a little bit more about this. Yeah, at the bottom of the page here. You might have noticed that this book isn't normal fiction. Okay, that's the point. There's no plot, there's no dialogue, and the action is frequently off stage. And what he's saying is that the moment you take what happened in Cambodia in the 1970s and turn it into entertainment, you run the risk of running all these literary metaphors in such a way, you know, pathos and so on, in such a way that people will actually lose sight of the actual horror of what happened. Here on the next page, dramatizing individual episodes will not capture the essentials of Cambodia. Such an approach will inevitably distort the issues by introducing lyric elements of pathos and character that are precisely what is absent in mass reality. Now, I don't know whether to agree with that or not. You know, I can think of some very good, dramatic treatments of what happened. The Killing Fields is a film that came out, I think, in the 80s and won an Oscar. I used to show that in my class, actually. And there's a recent, I think, First They Killed My Father. Is it called that? I'm not sure, but it's an Angelina Jolie movie, I think, again, you know, giving a treatment of this. So I'm not sure we have to agree with him entirely, but anyway, that's what he's saying. That's why he's not going to play the entertainment game. Hopefully now, the first story makes complete sense. I mean, it probably did anyway, but if it didn't, hopefully it does now. On the difficulties of crowd control is, we could retitle it, On the Difficulties of Being a Dictator. So he takes us to the Kent State tragedy, when students were demonstrating against the Vietnam War in 1970, and then 4 of them were shot dead by National Guardsmen. Actually, I have just an image for you here. There we are. So it's just a horrific event, but force its point, and it really struck home when I first read this, is that I'd completely forgotten this. I don't think I even knew about it. And I think that's what he's saying. It's so, you know, we are confronted every day with the deaths of so many people, and of course now it's in video games. God knows what the body count is upstairs when my son is playing his video games every night. You know, we're just inured to it. And this, the reality of it, the harshness of it, just gets lost. I think that's what he's trying to do on page 8 in the story, in the text here. He's trying to remind us that these were actual people. You know, the Kent State students were ordinary people. You know, they probably ate breakfast before coming to the demonstration. But what do they have? Do they have cereal and milk, or toast, bacon? What do they have? Perhaps at the moment the firing began, one of the victims was wondering about lunch. Hamburgers, milkshake? Was another student worried about a bad grade received for a carelessly written English paper? You can tell that Fawcett studied English at SFU. So these were real people, and it's so easy for us to forget that, isn't it? I think that's his point. Now, the other section here, below the bullet point on page 9, is to do with what he calls slapstick. And when you read that, you think, well, what's funny about this? But it's almost funny in a Monty Python way when you think about how dictators went about their business 2,000 years ago. So, you know, you have a Roman centurion who farts. Is that right? Yeah, somebody farts during the Passover. It creates a riot. And, you know, before the Romans can retake control, 30,000 people have died. Because it's really bloody difficult to keep control if you've got nothing but swords and sandals. Yeah? He gives another example of what he sees as almost comically difficult. And then he fast forwards and takes us back to 1970. And we get to the crux of the story on page 12 here. Under the bullet point, now we have the key question, the ideological question: what is in control? It's 24 hours now after the shooting, after the event, and the film has been edited into a more, shall we say, coherent package. And then across the page, halfway down, the final images return us to the scene of the event. It is empty of National Guardsmen and students, and of the realities of death and slapstick. Order has been imposed. In the next 3 videos, as I've said, I'm going to take you through all the other stories and prepare you for the essay, which is going to be easy, don't worry about it, it should be fine. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key questions we do need to be thinking about is how relevant this book is today. This was written in 1986. Is what he has to say still relevant, or even more relevant? And there's one other thing that crosses my mind that we should have at least in the back of our minds. How much did this book cost you? And what's my point? I think it retails for around 19, 20 bucks. Is that right? Unless you have a used copy, but I think a new version is around 20 bucks. So what do you think his royalties are on the sale of each copy? I have, for my very many sins, about 125 students this term, all doing English 100, and all reading this book. So that's just me. So, that's, I don't know how many copies have been bought, and then you think of the other instructors in Canada and North America and elsewhere who are teaching this book, students who are buying it. I don't know what Fawcett earns on the sale of each copy. It's gone through so many reprints, it might be up to 20, 30, 40%. I don't know, I really don't know, but what's my point? The point is that it seems that you can worry about how we're all being screwed by elite groups out there, but you're still free to write a book about it and make money doing it. And how upfront is he about that? It's something that we should bear in mind when we come to critiquing this book. I'm being a little bit mischievous, but I want you at least to have that thought in mind. Okay, all right, enough of Cambodia today. What I want to do next is take you to that second thing I want to look at, which is hopefully going to help you with your writing of essays. So what I have sent to you by email, and I think I posted it on eLearn, is a student essay. And just because of how I scanned this and everything, it's actually coming to you as 4 separate pages. Apologies for that, but there's the first page, and you can see the topic is Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. Here's the second page. Some of my scribbles are still there. I tried to clean this up as best I could. Third page. Fourth. And now we have this page at the end. What I would like you to do, please, is spend some time now going through this student essay, marking it up yourself. So really, ideally, you would print out each page at home and then spend, I don't know, it could be up to an hour, whatever it takes you. Just go through it and try to identify for yourself, firstly, the grammatical errors. You know, when I sent your essay back to you, I gave you all these comments, and some of them have these abbreviations. So CS is comma splice, and MC is mixed construction, and so, you know, why don't you do that? Why don't you go through this and actually say, well, this is mixed construction, this is a run-on fuse sentence, this is an integration problem of quotes. Do that. And then reread it, looking for coherence problems more generally in terms of paragraph coherence and thesis development. And then finally, go through it in terms of MLA formatting and works cited. These students, and I did this with them many years ago, but this was in a literature class, as I mentioned, so they were required to write this with MLA format because it's English literature. For your research paper, of course, you can do MLA or APA, but this was MLA, right? So that's what I suggest you do. And stop the video now, do that, and then come back to me, okay? Right, let me take you to the first page. First thing to do is apologize for my scribble. It's like a spider, it's just going all over this place. Now, some of what I've written here you may not agree with, okay? But most of what I've written here is non-negotiable because I'm talking about things that are just wrong. Let's look at the beginning. She begins this essay before I begin, and I'm already being picky by asking to do what. You know, it's not a good way to start an essay. But in any case, that's an introductory element, so probably there should be a comma. I think it's important to briefly explore what Gothic fiction contributes to a writer such as Angela Carter, and to clarify what this type of genre actually is. Okay. And so I'm thinking she's going to clarify this so as to arrive at a thesis. That's my scribbled comment at the top. In fact, she doesn't really do that, or she does, but there is no thesis, which is a major problem in this essay. Next sentence, the term female Gothic was first used by Ellen Moers in Literary Women in 1976. Now, this is actually a book, as you see from the last works cited page. So because it's a book, it's not an essay, it should be italicized or underlined, so that's wrong. And there should be a comma before in 1976. She went on to describe this type of literature as, quote, the work that women writers have done since the 18th century. But this is why I've got a question mark there, because women have written all types of different literature since the 18th century. What makes it Gothic? What she needs to do here is connect that to what she says next by maintaining the quote, so that it's still a quote from Moers. The word Gothic appears to be a code word for the expression of women's fears. Moers goes on to analyze that these fears have to do with the female body, domestic routine, and the anxiety of childbirth. That also seems to me needs to be cited. We need a page number there, because presumably it's not page 90. So I'm being a bit picky here, but it seems to me that she hasn't properly cited or taken me to the different pages in the book where this information is coming from. But most importantly, there is no thesis at all. So what is the student here arguing for or against about this story? And I don't know. I mean, she's saying that it seems to relate to Gothic fiction, but not in a way that amounts to a thesis statement yet. Okay. Next paragraph. The female Gothic is involved into many different branches, and this is where we need a comma, she's got the comma in the wrong place, such as Gothic feminism, lesbian Gothic, and women's Gothic, proving, I don't think it's a proof, I think it's more indicative of how this genre of literature articulates the dissatisfaction that women have within their patriarchal society and is used as a platform where they may address that are not just addressing. You see, I'm confused. For me, this is a coherence problem. We've got different ideas here, all blending into each other in one sentence, which is why I've written mixed construction. So it would have been much better to break this sentence up and to make these different statements up as separate elements. And then she says, with this being the case, Gothic fiction has grown into a popular genre among female writers. And this is obviously a comma splice, because that's a sentence, right? Subject, verb, complete thought, followed by the next one. These writers have used Gothic. So obviously that needs to be a period or a semicolon, or comma and then she says, these writers have used Gothic literature to explore the pressing aspects and concerns of sexuality and femininity. But she's just said that. So a tautology is a repetition. And that's why I've written that there. So if I think about the first paragraph in front of us, it's grammatically all right. It's just that the quotes are not done very well and there's no thesis. If I look at the second paragraph here, it's grammatically disastrous. And bordering on incoherence. It's difficult to read, right? Now, third paragraph. To explore this further, I will be examining the work of Angela Carter, a postmodern feminist writer who has sought to utilize the well-known and successful genre of fantasy so as to, in order to, you need to start using that phrase, right? In order to write the ideal and definition of Western femininity. I'm sorry, I just don't really know what she means. How can she write the ideal of Western femininity? There's probably an intelligent thought there, but I'm not seeing it. It's not clear. Now we have a grammatical problem. Carter challenges fairy tale tradition. That's a sentence. So I guess what you would need here is a comma and comma. Instead of seeing from the outside in, comma, her heroine is able to tell her own story, comma, taking on a male dominate role of storyteller. So I hope you get the mixed construction here, that it's all kind of created by the run-on sentence, the fusing here. We've also got the wrong word. Dominant, not dominate. Okay? All right, so it's not going very well, is it? Why, top of page 2, why have we got a new paragraph here? Why is this indented? If she's trying to build on what she's just been saying, then she should set up the quote. But you never do this, right? This is like a quote as an island. I think she may have meant indentation here, but it's not properly indented, and it's not set up. And more to that point, Mackinnon is a new person who's just turned up, right, in this essay. You have to introduce your quotes. So what she should have done here, she should have said, as Sylvia Mackinnon says in her essay or book called da da da, and then you have the quote, and then you would have the page number in brackets, which would be the correct MLA formatting. But as it stands, this is just not properly integrated or formatted or cited. Next paragraph, the purpose of this paper will be to analyze Carter's representation of femininity with select examples from her short story, The Bloody Chamber, with the aim of demonstrating her approach to the pornographic portrayal of women, which is what, in other words, it would have been much better to have a clearer definition of what the student's thinking here. But as I've written in the corner on the side here in the margin, this seems to be a thesis. But why is the student telling me that, on page 2 what the purpose of the paper is? Should have been in the first paragraph, right? So she says, to achieve this, I'll be examining the significance of the chamber, the use of mirrors, and the implication of Felicien Roth's artwork. Okay. Now, first, so we avoid contractions in academic writing, so I would like to analyze the most significant and rather obvious thematic aspect in Carter's piece, which is the title. Not only is this title the title of the story that will be examined, but it is also the title of her collection of similarly themed stories. Now, I'm expecting her to say more about that, because this seems to be the topic sentence for the paragraph, but she doesn't. What she does is go back to the chamber and starts talking about that. Now we have an indentation on a new paragraph. I don't follow that. I don't know why this is indented. And now she says it's connected to the room where the story, where extreme violence and torture occurs. So I've got a paragraph coherence problem here as I've written, and you can see what I've said. If you can't read it, it says this is how it operates in this story, but what about the other stories? You just left that comment hanging. So that's the point. I repeat what I did in video 8, I think, when we were doing the CAP Writer's Guide. This is a paragraph. Give me a topic sentence, which tells me what the paragraph's going to be about. Explain it, next sentence. Give me an example, next sentence. Give me another example, next sentence. Everything relates to that topic only. Stop, go to the next paragraph. Okay? Don't leave things hanging, ideas hanging the way she has here. The heroine is one of the most objectified characters in Carter's collection. This is an apostrophe problem. Lots of you made this error. You're writing possessives, but you're not giving apostrophes, and you must in academic writing. Not when you're texting, I get it, but in academic writing, yes, that's our genre. Now, we have an integration of a quote problem. What do you do if you have a sentence followed by a quote? What do you use? Answer, colon. That's what's needed here. She's just gone straight into it. She's got a sentence. Take, for example, when the Marquis undresses her while he is still dressed. That's a sentence. And she's gone straight into the quote without using a colon. We have incorrect citation for MLA here. It's not the correct format. And we have a run-on sentence at the bottom here. So after the page 15 in the bracket, there should be probably a semicolon or a period. And then here, comma, he not only makes her into a pornographic image by stripping her, named? Bloody hell. I think that's a typo, right? Probably she means naked. But when you read the next page, you know, this literally doesn't make sense. So even if I just rewrite that word, it's just not. This sentence here at the bottom of page 2 is of course a problem, isn't it? It's running on and not making much sense. When we bring up the next page, okay, so now let's just move on to this next paragraph on page 3. In both cases, I'm not entirely sure what she means here, which 2 exact cases. That's a bit picky, but it's not entirely clear. But look at this. In both cases, the Chamber of Blood is a place of irreversible transformation and enlightenment. And, you know, thesis. There it is. That's actually a really interesting point. And what a shame that it wasn't at the end of the first paragraph. How can a torture chamber filled with blood and all the other symbolic references to it represent a place of enlightenment? And yet perhaps it does in some respects, as it goes back to what we were talking about in the video. And such a shame that the student just kind of drops it here, page 3, and leaves it without developing the point. In addition, and I think most importantly, the term bloody chamber refers, there's no need for that comma. Also, to a woman's womb, comma, which I think Carter uses explicitly to highlight the connection between the violence women experience and their scrutinized sexuality. So this is intelligent writing, it's just not accurate grammatically. And the next thing that strikes me is that it's clunky. We need a better transition here from one paragraph to the next. My scribble here is, as an example of this scrutiny, comma, there is a powerful use of mirrors, and that would give us a nice sort of transition into this next paragraph. So this is going to be about mirrors, this paragraph. Carter uses them to magnify the extent of the objectification of this young bride. The Marquis strips his bride, da, 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 da. But look at the quote. We've got a sentence followed by a quote. So what do we need? Colon. Okay. And now we've got a run-on. So she needs to somehow link to the next quote. So she could have done a period and said, you know, we find a similar image written on page 17, comma, where Carter refers to a dozen husbands. So just get this idea that you need to braid and splice your quotes into your sentences, all right? She uses this opportunity of mirrors to universalize her characters, alluding to the fact that this act has occurred time and time again. In addition, the use of mirrors has a startling resemblance to televisions, or more commonly now to computer screens. And as I've written on the side here, this is actually a really interesting point, but it doesn't belong in this paragraph. This is now about our up-to-date modern modes of objectifying women, and it belongs in a different paragraph. So that she is, in fact, the pornography. The two words, in fact, are parenthetical. It's as though they're in brackets. You can delete them, and this would still be grammatically correct, but they're there, and so they should be bracketed off or in commas. I've written PAR on most of your papers because a lot of you are not doing this, and it causes coherence problems. Not so much here, but in other sentences it can be disastrous. All right, it is only then that she realizes her new husband is objectifying her, and that, comma, interestingly enough, parenthetical element, she is aroused by her objectification. So that sentence is just not coherent because of the word how, which I've scribbled out. And then she says it's thought-provoking to read this, seeing as that it's an issue that many women have to come to terms with. Yeah, good point, but it doesn't belong in this paragraph about mirrors. It's another paragraph. And now we've got a mixed construction problem, especially now with the increased ways in which sex is used as a marketing tool, which takes on a role of shaping values, beliefs, and norms, which then creates a tug of war where there is a little bundle of... yeah, so I'm just kind of confused when I'm reading it. And that's caused because of the failure to properly punctuate this. She then says, I would like to now turn to Félicien Rob, a Belgian artist whose, and you can see my correction here, whose work explored sex, death, and satanic images. Carter is able to navigate the world of art and the world of literature in order to create a multi-textual piece with layers of meaning. But that's a different point. We've actually got two topic sentences here. Do you see? The first one says she's going to turn to Rob and talk about Rob, but in the very next sentence, she says something different topic. So better to delete that and now go straight into what she says. As mentioned, much of Rob's artwork dealt with sex, death, sex, and satanic images, all of which appear in the Bloody Chamber and play into the relation to the explicit description of sexual behavior and the ethics of its use of sexuality that plays into... oh, it's just a run on here. Rob's dealings with these subjects are unmistakable, as was the blatant pornographic tone of many of his drawings. Okay, such a tone that when this virginal bride comes across the Marquis' leather book, and we need an apostrophe here, it's a possessive problem, the book belongs to the Marquis, there needs to be a comma, we as readers feel a panic and the turn in our stomachs to such a violent eroticized art. You see, this is now a different sentence. Comma, and we feel as if we need to protect her. There's a simple fix to the student's basic grammatical problem. She needs to write shorter, simpler sentences. And how many of you have I said that to you? That's what she needs to do here, because she's just running away with her thoughts, and it's confusing. Final paragraph. This is a list, I think. Elaborate mirrors that act like screens, Felicity Mock's artwork, which takes on the role of pornography, and the implicated violence of the bloody chamber all contribute to the significant thematic aspect of Carter's piece. Fine. It is a portrayal of sexuality, gender roles, and feminine identity. Fine. And now we have a sentence fragment, retrospectively told by the female heroine. So, take it from me, right? If you begin a sentence in English with a word, sort of an adverb, finishing with a Y here, you will need to have a comma somewhere down the track. So, retrospectively told by the female heroine, comma, finish the sentence. Okay. It is obvious that Carter takes a feminist position while writing. Carter illustrates that gender roles can be molded and reshaped, that women do not have to always be weak and passive, comma, but active and strong. And this text is a remarkable example of the ever-evolving Gothic fantasy genre. But actually, I think what she was trying to say at the beginning of the essay is that this is feminist Gothic fantasy genre. So she kind of backs away from making her own point there at the very end. And more generally, I've made the point here that this lacks a fair amount of research. I think you should have done much more research on this, plus on Carter's problematic stance for many feminists. That was my comment. Feminism is a very interesting field at the moment in particular. Highly contested with lots of different competing views and definitions and interpretations. And Carter's in the middle of that contested space. There are some feminists who approve of her stories and others who do not. And this essay is sadly lacking in that type of research. Bearing in mind, of course, that this was a literature course that we had done, an introduction to feminist theory in that course, I was really hoping that the student would go down that track, and she didn't really. So you can see my final comment here. You make some interesting points. Yes, she does. And there is some research here, but the transitional and grammatical errors make it almost impossible to follow the thesis development, and I've given her a D/F. Frankly, I must have been feeling generous because it really is quite poor. And I can take you finally to the final page here, which is just a mess, isn't it? I mean, this should have been MLA, which means it should have been titled Works Cited. So the bloody chamber should have been italicized or underlined as the actual book. She's got the, place and publisher the wrong way around. The dates are in the wrong place. It's just a bloody mess, right? I remember the student after I handed back her essay. She was very nice about it, very actually apologetic. She was a very good student, and I think she got a really good grade on her first assignment. What this was a problem that I'm sure so many of you are familiar with. She was just overworked. She was doing, I think, 5 courses, holding down, she said, 2 jobs. She wrote this essay sort of 2 o'clock in the morning before deadline. Look, I get it. I've been there myself as a student. But my God, did she let herself down. And it's sad when something like that happens. She got it. She understood. She took it on the chin. And hopefully learned an important lesson about time management for her. For you, hopefully that, and hopefully just going through this has helped you to understand a bit better these errors that we need to be avoiding as best we can. Okay? All right, enough of that for now. We'll get back into Cambodia in the next video. So thank you for your time, and I will see you